Let's try to understand why the rich are rich, the poor are poor, and the middle class, well, middle class, as explained by Robert Kiyosaki in his book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Now, this book is the story of Robert Kiyosaki's life in some ways because it talks about the two most influential people in his life, which included his poor dad, who is his biological father, an intelligent and educated man who had a PhD and had a well paying job but struggled financially throughout his life. On the other hand, we have his rich dad, who was his father's friend, and he had only 8th grade education, but that didn't stop him from becoming one of the richest men in Hawaii. So let's break this down and try to comprehend how did these two guys do what they did, and we'll also dive into the three most important lessons learned from his poor dad and his rich dad. But before we do that, let's talk a little about the financial statements because most people understand the difference between income and expense. It's pretty straightforward, but fail to understand the difference between assets and liabilities. Now, assets are something that work for you and generate income for you even when you're not working. For example, a real estate investment that produces $1,000 a month of income is an asset. A business which profits and produces income for you is another asset. On the other hand, a liability is always taking money from your pocket, even when it is sitting idle, that is, when you're not using it. For example, you bought a large house for which you need to pay mortgage every single day. But that's really not putting any money into your pocket. Now that's a liability. A big luxury car or bike you bought for your own personal use is another liability. Now that you understand what assets and liabilities are, let's understand the most important lessons to be learned from this book. And the first lesson is what kind of education to get. The poor dad always told Robert to go ahead and get the best possible education so that you can get a great job. And he believed in conventional education. The poor dad, who himself was a teacher, never really educated himself about money and finances. He was an intelligent, educated man who had a PhD, but was ignorant when it came to his finances and how money worked. On the other hand, his rich dad, who had only 8th grade education, always said to get the best education possible so that you can create jobs, which was to start up a business or buy others' business and give other people jobs. A huge difference in mindset. There are four key areas of financial education which he always emphasized on, which were accounting, investing, marketing, and law, which according to him are ought to be taught in schools rather than the general education received today. The second lesson carries one of the most important takeaways. Suppose you graduate from a college. What would you do next? What kind of work should you do? Well, here's the key. The rich dad did not work for money. What would the poor and middle class people do? This is what the poor dad said: go get a degree and get a job. His motto was simply to go work for money for the rest of your life. The middle class people learn how to work for money. They work for others all their life. The first person to work for is the employer. Then they work for the government because the government takes taxes as soon as they receive an income. And then they work for the bank because they need to pay off their heavy loans. After they're done paying the employer, the government, and the bank, do they start to work for themselves and then they wonder why they are not rich. It is fear and greed that runs their lives. Fear of risking one's profession into creating a business which might or might not be successful. The second being greed of working harder and harder every single day to receive a greater paycheck. Whereas the rich dad told Robert that rich people don't work for money, money works for them. His motto was to work to acquire and build upon your assets so that they can generate more income. The third and final lesson is once you have done your educational course, you are doing something. That is, when you have a job or a business. How exactly do you invest or spend your money? Now, it is important to pay yourself first before anyone else. You would know a few people who would make a lot of money but are still broke in sense that they have almost no real tangible assets. Why does this happen to people? Well, the key lies in the simple question: when are you paying yourself? Now, here's what the poor people do: they have income coming in, but all of it goes out into expenses and they never invest into assets. They're ignorant about how to manage income, and that just simply drains out into expenses and the cycle just continues. So basically, they never pay themselves. The middle class people, however, start with a certain amount of income too that just turns into liabilities, and liabilities simply become expenses. They have very limited assets, which could be retirement savings, or bank savings, or some sort of housing. And hence, these people in the middle class are simply paying themselves last. However, the rich pay themselves first. Now, what that means is that as soon as the income comes, they send a portion of it into assets, and the remainder of the wealth is invested into expenses and liabilities. The poor and middle class prioritize expenses and liabilities, while the rich build upon their assets and ensure that their expenses are much lower than the income, and that the liabilities are much lower than their assets. For most people, their profession is their income, while for the rich, their assets are their income. Apply these lessons to your life, for may I ask you one day, if you stopped working, how long could you survive? And now you would laugh and tell me, I no longer work for money, money works for me.